So I hope. So that's the confirmation of that. So I will immediately turn to our first part of the activity, which is a presentation by Diederik Samsom, as I said, head of cabinet of First Vice President Frans Timmermans, but somebody who is really having a very long track record in climate and energy policies, both as part of the NGO movement a long time ago, but then went into national politics in the Netherlands, into high-level national politics, but since 2019 is serving in the European Union as part of the cabinet of the current commission, as I said. We have asked Diederik to give us a short introduction to the main contents, main highlights from his perspective of the Fit for 55 package, but also turning into the process of the further development and adoption of the package into the EU. And so without further ado, I would like to give the floor to Diederik. Thank you.
Thank you, Wendel. Thank you. Can you hear me? That's great. Let's see. Yes, I think I'm speaking to an audience that has, well, obviously not read all the 12,000 pages of the Fit for 55 package, but got the gist of it. So I'm not going to explain all those issues again. I just want to stress a few political highlights of this. In the end, getting Europe into a -55 status in 2030 on a trajectory towards climate neutrality is a financial challenge. It's a technological challenge, but it's most of all a social challenge. We know from experience from the first, the second, and the third, and the fourth industrial revolution that every transition has a very Darwinistic nature. It always ends up with more money and more power in the hands of fewer people. And what we did in the past, and pretty successful as a continent, being Europe, was actually to repair that damage afterwards with redistribution, the heart of politics. So after the first industrial revolution, the invention of the steam engine, obviously Verelendung was all over the place, and the rise of social movements, labor unions, and social democratic parties occurred, and damage was repaired afterwards. The same happened after the second and the third, which led to huge changes, and they led to an enormous increase in wealth, enabling us to repair that damage. This time is different. This transition is different, and we cannot go about the same strategy. So we cannot afford to make this transition first and repair the damage afterwards. We have to enshrine the justness, the equal distribution, the redistributional challenge, the political challenge, into this package. And that's why you can look at the Fit for 55 proposals as 12 separate technical legislative proposals about setting a standard for cars, requiring a blending mandate for aviation fuels, and sort of the like. But actually, you can also look at it from a different angle and observe what you could call the solidarity package of the Fit for 55 proposals, the solidarity heart of it. The solidarity heart of it consists of all the elements that deal with the redistributional challenge, which is within the ETS proposal. It's the provision that redistributes ETS allowances from rich member states to poor member states. Within the ESR, it's effort sharing regulation. It's obviously the effort sharing regulation itself, providing for a higher effort for richer member states and a lower effort for poorer member states. It's the modernization fund, obviously, because it's direct money transfer from rich to poor states, poorer member states. And we have a new element, a big new element, the biggest of all, which is the Social Climate Fund. The Social Climate Fund is the modernization fund, but then modeled by the image of the Recovery and Resilience Facility. The big difference between the Modernization Fund and the Social Climate Fund is obviously its conditionality. Countries are eligible for that money, but only when they provide the specific plans and the specific strategy, only when they can prove that they really spend that money on specific targets, which are addressing the social challenge of the big transition that we go through. We think that is needed in order to create a political agreement within Europe, because we know that countries that have to transfer the money hate to do that unless they are certain that that money is spent in a specific way. This was the trade-off in the Recovery and Resilience Facility, and it will be, if we get to it, the reason for an agreement on the Fit for 55 package. That Social Climate Fund being essential, a conditio sine qua non for this whole package, also makes the new ETS quite important. I wouldn't say a conditio sine qua non, because in theory there are alternatives for that new ETS. In practice, they're not. So, which brings me immediately to the most, let's say, contentious part of the Fit for 55 package, and that is that new ETS for road and buildings. And let me explain in a few minutes, and then I hand the floor to questions and answers. Let me explain in a few minutes why we have this. We all know that in order to create a -55 Europe, every sector has to contribute much more than it did so far. We also know that so far in the, let's say, pathway towards a -40 Europe that we still have in our current legislation, only two sectors did the heavy lifting: electricity and industry. That's the sectors where the biggest reductions have taken place. And you could say for many reasons, but one of the reasons is that they had the most effective instrument where they had to comply with, which is the ETS. So it is one reason that we think that the two other sectors that have done nothing at all or hardly anything, the building sector and the road transport sector, have to now join the party. And the best way to join the party in an effective way is to use the most effective instrument, which is an ETS. It's not the only reason why we take the ETS as one of the instruments. The other reason, one of the other reasons, is that if you talk about solidarity in this package, you talk about European solidarity, not national solidarity. National solidarity is not enough. And I mean, you could design an alternative for a new ETS for buildings and road transport. You could leave it to the member states. You can leave it as it is under the effort sharing regulation without additional measures. And you wish all the member states good luck with their challenge. And some member states will manage. It's not very complicated. It's no rocket science. The alternative for a European-wide ETS for road transport is obviously regulate and tax. So you regulate the fuels, the carbon intensity of the fuels, and since you know that that will lead to an increase at the petrol station, you tax it, and you tax those fuels in order to be able to redistribute the revenues to poor households, helping them with this challenge, coping with this challenge. It's actually a mini redistribution on the level of Luxembourg or the Netherlands or Belgium or Finland or Sweden. And then from those countries, which will be very capable of doing this, we wish good luck to Romania, Bulgaria, Croatia, and the other countries that have a higher challenge of decarbonization. They have a lower GDP per capita, and they cannot cope with this challenge on their own. We need European solidarity, and we need a European instrument, and that's why the new ETS came up as the best and effective alternative. One remark on possible alternatives for this new ETS, because I listened carefully to all stakeholders, for instance, members of the European Parliament, that said we will come up with an alternative for this instrument. Please do. I invite everybody, I challenge everybody to come up with an alternative. But you can't replace water with a bucket. So if you say no, we get rid of the new ETS and we replace that with a stricter ESR, effort sharing regulation, you replace water with a bucket, because the one is an instrument and the other is a target. And obviously a target can lead to an instrument on national level, as I explained, but it's not the same and it will not work. So our conclusion, and that's also what why we presented the package as we did, is that this consistent and coherent approach towards -55 requires this piece of legislation. It's like this little ball that I have in my hand here. It's actually a puzzle, and that consists of little pieces, complicated pieces. If you take one piece out, it's not a ball anymore. So if you take, let's assume, the new ETS out, you have to put something back that looks the same in order to create the same result in the end. That's the complicated challenge that we have. We do think that the package as we have constructed has the best chance of meeting both the financial, the technical, but most of all, the social challenge on a European scale, getting Europe on a pathway towards climate neutrality. And it's about time that we do that. Thanks for this, and I'm open for questions if you have any.
Thanks, Diederik. There's one question in the Q&A box, and I will raise that one, and I will raise a few others, and then I see that also Monica has her hand up. So the question in the Q&A is that integrating the sectors, and then specifically the new sectors in the ETS2, buildings and road transport, will increase the carbon price in those sectors, but it will also likely, as that is a given in the carbon market approach, it will also lead to a certain volatility in the prices, while industry would say that they need some clear long-term predictability. So how do you see that conflict? So that's one question. If I may add two others. One is about how you see the timeline for the adoption of the different elements of the package, knowing that we're actually already in the timeline when they are to be implemented, because these are revision of existing legislations that are already being implemented. So how do you see that? But secondly, also building further on your last elements of the coherence, given that this package consists of a range of individual pieces of legislation where different people will be engaged, at least definitely from the European Parliament. There are different lead rapporteurs and so on and so on. How would the Commission kind of contribute in the further process of the co-legislators to this coherence and avoid that all of these individual packages will kind of have their own pathways and not necessarily remain part of a coherent approach? And then if it's okay for you, I'll still give the floor to Monica for her question, and then you take them all as in once.
Yeah, okay. Please.
Monica.
Yes, good morning, and I'm very, very grateful for this occasion, Diederik or Mr. Samsom. I am very skeptical on this instrument. I am very skeptical for two reasons. First, because as somebody else also mentioned, the elasticity of the prices, I mean, the push to change in terms of buildings, for example, your model, because your builds, you introduce an ETS is limited, you really run the risk of lock-in lots of people in basically remaining dependent from subsidies, from public subsidies, to basically maintain their fossil fuel heating. And I would say you ask for an alternative. I think that the alternative, you really have it. And that is to put much more, a better legislation and stronger limits and provisions in the Energy Efficiency Directive and the EPBD, because it is really a question of effectiveness. And in Germany, where this measure is actually more or less already in place, there are lots of problems of implementation. You can multiply this by 27. And I really believe that the road of the market instruments have proven relatively less effective in many cases, and certainly in buildings. So I think that there will be a lot of discussions, and I hope that you will take on the discussion, but of course it will be above all the co-legislator that will do that.
Okay.
Thank you, Monica. So I give now the floor back to Diederik, and then see whether there's more questions.
Okay, let me try and address, and I will end up with the time frame because that's the more, let's say, operational part of the discussion. But first, the more principled part of the discussion. Monica says that the market-based instruments have not been effective. The empirical evidence shows the exact opposite. As a social democrat, I sometimes I hate to admit it, but it was the ETS that is effective on industry and electricity, and the regulation that we have in place on buildings has not delivered the CO2 reduction that we need. And then you say the price elasticity of how for households is very low. That is indeed a consensus, although looking outside of my windows right now, looking into the real world where that we do that test in a pretty cynical way, by the way, now, because we haven't acted in time. We are too dependent on foreign gas, and we now subject to an enormous price spike. And you can see in every country a run on insulation measures. So I'm not sure how big the price elasticity or how small that actually is, but it's actually not the most important argument, because the main misunderstanding for on this new ETS is that it engages with households. It doesn't. It engages with the fuel suppliers, with, in this case, the heating fuel suppliers. And it works exactly the same way as with the electricity suppliers. By the way, with electricity that is served to households, and we have an ETS on electricity for 15 years now, and it has been hugely successful. Not because the price elasticity for electricity is very high in households, no, but because it changes the assessment in the boardroom of the company itself. Do I buy all those allowances that get more expensive every year, or do I decarbonize my product in order to be more resilient for the future in terms and hedge myself against those increased ETS prices? That's what will happen with transport fuels, with heating fuels, and indeed also with the machines that the transport fuel is used in, cars, and the buildings that the heating fuel is used in, houses. We can see a different, and I want to make this maybe more even visual. On the Maasvlakte in the Netherlands, there's a huge a huge coal-fired power station, one of the biggest in Europe. And you all have justifiably and rightfully so kicked us around the room, telling us to slam an ETS on that power station in order to change, to decarbonize their product. That electricity goes directly to households. And I haven't heard anybody about the challenge of that and the problems with implementation of that and the price elasticity of that. No, we were kicked around the room telling us that we should strengthen it, make it more strict, increase the price, get the bastards. And we did, and it was very successful. Next to the coal-fired power station on the Maasvlakte is the biggest refinery in Europe, Shell, making the fuels for transport in half of Europe. And now we are told to back off, not to implement an ETS on those fuels in order to do exactly the same as what we did so successfully with coal-fired power. I don't see the consistency there. And lastly, your alternative, Monica, is only half the alternative. Because if you regulate fuels or houses and you require landlords or house owners to start insulating, you put a cost burden on all of them, an equal cost burden on all of them. And as I said in the beginning, the heart of politics is that you need redistribution if you do that, because not every household in Europe is able to deal with that cost burden. Where do you get the money from? You get it from taxation. Taxation is a national issue. So you will lose the European dimension and the European solidarity that we need, and this will not happen. It will happen in Luxembourg, and it might happen in Finland. It will not happen in Croatia. It will not happen in Romania, and we are one continent. This is one project, and we should not leave anybody or any country behind. So the alternative that you present needs to be a complete alternative. And there is an alternative for European solidarity in terms of finance. It's called the MFF. So let's open the MFF and try this again. We all know that, and that brings me to the time frame, that we are in a hurry. And we are in such a hurry that we are aiming for a general approach in the first half of next year, so under the French presidency, which means that the European Council of next March will have to deal with the political agreement on this package. And the political agreement will not be about 1 or 1.5% blending mandate for aviation fuels. It will be about the heart of the package, which is the solidarity part of the package. So it will be about the social climate fund, the effort sharing regulation, the modernization fund. That package will be dealt with on the European Council. And if we have our say, we haven't, it's up to the European Council, but we would strongly advise them to hurry up and make themselves ready for 5 days and 5 nights, because that's what it took for the RRF in March next year. And we hope and we expect that after such a political deal on the heart of the package, the general approach on 12 separate legislative proposals will fall into place. I shouldn't say easily, but at least not too long after that. So before halfway. That also means that Parliament has to position itself before the half of 2022, so that we can go into trilogues, about 300 of them in the Czech presidency, and hopefully conclude this whole package at the end of 2022, which actually should be the last moment that we do this. I hear everybody say, use the words urgency and walk the talk and you know the blah. If we're really serious about that, we can't lose a day.
Thank you, Diederik. Maybe there was one further question, and maybe you can do that shortly. It's the question why only 25% of the revenues from the second pillar of the ETS would be used for the social climate fund. Why is there not a greater contribution to that?
Well, actually it's 50%, because we require co-financing. So why 50 and why not 100? That might be the idea. Let me give you the reasoning behind it. The revenues from the new ETS are about 40 billion a year. 40 billion a year. So if you would assume that that whole cost increase on those sectors, on those fuel producers and gas distribution companies, were to trickle down to all the households in Europe, the collective energy bill of European households will increase with 40 billion euros a year. We all know that 66% of those households is perfectly capable of dealing with that, and they should. The honest story is that energy should become more expensive than it is today. Well, not today, but in general last year. So that's okay. We know for 33%, and then I take the extreme case, it's difficult or even impossible to deal with that increase. So we need to compensate 1/3 of the energy bill. Actually, we need to compensate less, but let's take it broadly so that we never end up with too little money. We need to compensate 1/3 of the energy bill increase, which is about 13.3 billion euros. We have 20 billion euros available. So even if we are very ineffective in our redistribution, and we are a little ineffective because redistribution is ineffective, but we think that we took a safety margin that is large enough in order to address the social challenge. By the way, that compensation should preferably not be direct money. If there's no alternative, it can be, but that compensation should obviously be a sustainable solution, which is insulate, renovate houses, get cleaner cars, and provide those people with a sustainable solution. Sustainable in 2 ways, long endurance and clean. And that's where this instrument can work. And again, I challenge everyone who thinks that this is the wrong way to go to come up with an alternative that both does the environmental job, so creates, meets the targets, and provides the money to realize the social challenge.
Thank you very much, Diederik. Thank you, Mr. Samsom. I think we've come to the end of this part, and so we now move to the second part, which is the panel conversation with representatives from businesses, trade unions, etc. And I will now give the floor to Audrey, who will be moderating that part. Thank you.
Many thanks to you, Wendel, Mr. Diederik Samsom, for this very interesting intervention, setting the scene and actually already entering the debate we will now continue or move on to with key stakeholders. Because now we will hear from organizations on how we can enhance the EU's climate ambitions through this package, and so ensure a just transition towards low carbon economy in Europe. May I introduce our speakers today? I'm very glad to welcome. Please open the camera. Ursula Woodburn. Hello, Ursula. Ursula is Program Director of the Corporate Leaders Group Europe. Hi. Are you with us?
Hi, yes. Can you see me okay?
Great,
right.
Thank you. Also, already heard this morning, Monica Frassoni, President of the European Alliance to Save Energy. Hello, Monica. Welcoming also Benjamin Denis, Senior Policy Advisor at IndustriAll Europe. Hello, Benjamin.
Good morning.
Marcin Kowalczyk, Head of Climate at WWF Poland. Hello, Marcin.
Hello.
Hello. And back with us also for this panel, Wendel Trio, Director of CAN Europe. Before we start, just some housekeeping rule. Please type your question in the Q&A box. We will try to answer as many questions as possible. And please note again that this event is being recorded. So now, my first question would be for Ursula Woodburn. Ursula, in recent years, CLG, Corporate Leaders Group Europe, has brought together an important number of representatives from the European business community to express your support for higher climate ambition. And in light of your recent reports and business letters, would you please share with us today your assessment of the package, the Fit for 55 package, from the business perspective, and also elaborate on the co-benefits of climate action for the economy?
Thank you, Audrey. Yeah, I'm very happy to be here and to have this opportunity to highlight some of our views. I think, we work with businesses through CLG Europe, which is a pan-European group of businesses, but also globally through We Mean Business, the We Mean Business Coalition, and across Europe. And we really see enormous support and momentum from businesses in support of ambitious climate action. And I mean, perhaps just to start with the question of the co-benefits, it's clear to us that this is an unmissable opportunity now, because we are in the middle of what is described as the global race to zero to some extent. So what we see is across the world, the transformation of economies towards clean infrastructure and renewables, and this could present enormous opportunities for business. But it's clear that businesses need to move now, but also the policy frameworks to support the move both for businesses and people also need to move now. And if we don't, we could clearly miss an opportunity. And I think that, every analysis I read basically shows, whether it's the Commission's modelling, our own modelling, or the European Central Bank's modelling recently shows that early climate action is better for the economy. Overall, the trajectory to net zero has a positive impact on the modelling. Economic recovery options shows that if you massively invest in renewables, electric vehicles, and energy efficiency, there is a much more positive outcome overall for GDP and job creation than focusing on other measures, or for example, solely on VAT measures. And this is, of course, without even considering the enormous cost of the impacts of climate change. So I think broadly we see that the economic analysis, the macroeconomic analysis demonstrates that there are major co-benefits to moving. And we really welcome the explicit grounding of the package in the concept that climate action is a precondition for sustainable economic growth. This has been clearly set out, and we think this is a major step forward, and we believe that this is incredibly important. And I mean, really now sitting in this big debate on the energy pricing, it really shows more than ever the need to ensure resilience in the economy and protect economies against the impacts of fossil fuel dependence. But of course, this is one side of it. The transformation will lead to significant disruption for specific sectors and communities. This is absolutely clear as well. So, you know, the overall outcome will be much better for people and the economy, but the package itself has many different elements to it, and I think we need to be make sure that the different disruptive impacts are considered. And when we analyze the report, so we've recently carried out quite a broad analysis of the whole Fit for 55 package, which is 40 pages, and obviously it's huge, such a huge package of different measures. I won't go into all of it now, but a couple of points. I think we basically support the overall package, the ambition of the overall package, and it's clear this needs to remain. The conversation about ETS is very interesting. I think we agree that it's really important to have clarity on the ETS and support for the ETS system, but this has to be backed up by policies as well, regulations. It's clear that one does not work without the other, so you need both. And if you look at the overall package, we kind of assessed all the different measures, and I think what we saw was the broad package is a very impressive and comprehensive set of measures. If we were to look at some of the gaps, we would see that it would be interesting to see how these different measures can support each other. How can we analyze the impact of all these different measures on each other and what that will lead to? How can we more integrate questions around the circular economy and ensure that that's also brought into the debate? And how do we really look at the impact on people? How do we look at the fact that this will shape the bills people will pay, the choices they have, what businesses will need to do? We need to really make sure that the package identifies how to make the transition both attractive and affordable. So we're not just looking at how we increase the price of carbon, but also how we make it attractive for people and businesses to take up these measures. And I think there are some gaps there. And finally, I guess some of the other members of the panel will look at this, you know, to make this transition, we need jobs and we need to identify the skills gaps and support the workers that need to be reskilled or upskilled in the near future. And one of the big blockers for energy efficiency is, you know, in fact, people available and trained and available to implement it at the moment. So there's many questions like that. But I think broadly, CLG Europe supports the overall ambition, and we really look forward to engaging in this debate in the next period.
Thank you very much, Ursula, for this first insight, this first assessment. I would like to share a question now with Monica Frassoni, President of the European Alliance for Safe Energy. Monica, we just had a glimpse of your concerns. Now let's go a bit deeper into that, please. Energy savings and renewable energy are fundamental elements of the energy transition, but we lack of sufficient progress in their deployment, which is currently not fast enough. And from your perspective, taking the opportunity of the package, what are the changes that need to take place in the policy framework, especially related to energy, to boost climate action on the ground?
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the invitation, and I thank you also for my co-panelists. I actually agree with everything Ursula said, so I don't need to repeat that. Well, first of all, let me say that we also support broadly the package. Of course, I also was one of those who didn't read the 12,000 pages, but I can say that it is not only the legislation, it's also, I believe, the way in which this legislation and this package is perceived, the discounting. And we see today that we need to defend the package also because there is a huge backlash that is creating itself, including because of the energy prices and because of a narrative going around the energy prices that puts the burden and the fault on the wrong culprit, which is the energy transition. And I think that this is a problem because the short-term measures that a lot of member states are envisaging to take, and I put, and also not short-term, also some of the, let's say, perception and the approach that is there in terms of getting to terms with the energy bills could be harmful for the energy transition. And we have to be very clear also from the part of industry that is in favor and is very pushing, and it finds an element of business and on competitiveness on the green transition, to be very clear about what needs to be done. So I think that we have to manage and to work in this period on these two levels, to be very specific on our criticism and also the fight that we will do, that we will engage together and working also with some of the co-legislators, but also a very big campaign in terms of public opinion in order not to make these wrong beliefs to be there, because let's face it, those who are against the let's say what I call the fossil powers are actually very powerful. And we don't have to hide behind some reasonings that could make their arguments stronger. That is why I was trying to talk about earlier this question of ETS2, because this ETS2 is actually used in the public debate to say that the transition is costly, that we cannot afford it, and that indeed this ETS2 is a way through which we basically pass the German system and model that is basically to make the citizens, which according to many European citizens are richer than others, to pay instead than the business and the industry. So I think that this is a very important point that we have to underline. In terms of what I believe, we believe that we need to change. There are many things, but I will concentrate on two. One is the question of the targets. If you have non-binding targets for energy efficiency, I'm talking about the energy efficiency directly, sorry. If you don't have a binding targets, then you're doomed. I mean, it's I understand that the Commission already put it in the last recast, and this was not one. The fact that these targets are not binding is an issue. And when Diederik, Mr. Samsom says, well, ETS worked and energy efficiency didn't, of course, because the legislation and the money and the resources were not exactly comparable. And of course, if you have a different kind of legislation, you also will have, hopefully, a different kind of effectiveness. So here really is something that we cannot really miss. On the question of the targets, we also are very worried of the fact that basically in the current legislation, there is no clear obligation for member states. You know, member states do not have a clear obligation to do stuff in terms of numbers. And, you know, I am Italian, as you know, and I heard already several of my compatriots saying, well, this thing of not having a national target is great. We can afford to have a less ambitious energy efficiency and renewable target, because if we put it too high, then we will make the work of other member states easier. Now, if this is, if the European target is, and there are no ways through which you can actually check that member states do what they have to do, then also having a binding target that at European level, notably for energy efficiency, will not make renovations easier. The second point is, and I will finish quickly, is the question of the EPBD. This is a proposal that has not been done yet, but we understand that there is a lot of hesitation from the part of the Commission to present minimum performance standards. And this is a problem, because in the moment in which you don't define what you have to do at the minimum everywhere, then you are bound to have low-level renovation, if any. And once again, you're not calling you're not actually exploiting the whole of your potential. Here as well, a very quick example from what is happening in my country. As you know, there was this idea of this very generous eco bonus, which is costing a hell of a lot to the state. This is something that can be sustainable for a while, but we have to make sure that this kind of subsidies, because this is what they are actually helping in high-level renovation and not low-level, as it is the case today, and above all, are not subsidizing also gas boilers instead of other kinds of instruments and technology. So, of course, the good side is that till now, this bonus has helped creating more or less 132,000 new jobs in the building sector. So I think that we really need to be clear and to put from the European level very clear guidelines, because otherwise we are not going to reach our goals. And this is not the fault of the energy efficiency, let's say, instruments, but the fact that they are not ambitious enough. Thank you.
Well, many thanks, Monica, for this intervention. I have as takeaway a national ownership and responsibility are key, as steel keys in Europe. Benjamin, Denis, you heard also Diederik Samsom, the solidarity part is the heart of the Fit for 55. My next question would be then for you. Many workers are currently affected by climate change. We witness, for instance, the loss of productivity in agriculture, an increased pressure on health and emergency services, supplies problem in the industry, infrastructure damages in the energy and transport sectors, increased costs and risk in insurance, etc., etc. Hence, you have been vocal on the need to increase the EU's climate target to prevent even more disruptive climate impacts. And with the EU's package, the Fit for 55, that is aiming to accelerate Europe's climate and energy transition, many workers will either benefit from this transition or possibly be affected by it. So against this backdrop, we would like to give you the floor to explain your position about the package and how it should be further improved to ensure a just transition in Europe.
Merci, Audrey. Thank you, Audrey. Indeed, we support the revised 2030 target in the context of efforts to reach climate neutrality by 2050 in a socially fair way. Of course, for us, the question is not whether or not we have to accelerate the decarbonization, the pace of emission reductions. The question is how to do that. And when it comes to the package, to the Fit for 55% package, I didn't read the 12,000 pages. I would like to thank those who invented the Control F application, because it's quite useful to go through the package. But yeah, as democratic organization, we have produced a preliminary analysis, and we are currently intensively consulting our members. 185 trade union organizations coming from 40 European countries. And we are discussing the package with all the attention and all the nuance needed to avoid the syndrome, which is to call for action, but at the same time to block any kind of proposal. So we are trying to engage as constructively as possible in those discussions. Having said that, as you know, as trade unions, our core business is to care about workers' rights and employment. And we can already deplore the weakness of the labor dimension, the labor aspects in the package, despite all the elements that Diederik Samsom mentioned earlier. We have quite significant additional emission reduction efforts to deliver, and these efforts are absolutely necessary, but we have to deliver those additional efforts without additional means to cope with the employment and labor-related challenges. The currently discussed proposals will dramatically impact many of our sectors, if not all of them. This is not only about the 500,000 of workers in the coal-related industries. According to our calculations, the sectors that will have to transform, notably because of the climate objectives in terms of processes, in terms of new feedstock becoming more circular, and so on and so forth. Those sectors represent altogether 25 million of men and women in the EU 27. So it's a massive amount of jobs that are at stake. And let me just give you one example, the car industry. This is an example which is quite striking. We have 2.6 million workers in the car manufacturing industries in Europe, and an additional million in basic industries that are important suppliers of the automotive industry, steel, glass, rubber, just to mention the main ones. And if you consider also the jobs related to car use, it represents 12.6 million of workers in the EU, and it means 6.6% of all jobs in the EU. We have also in that industry a high geographical concentration. In some countries like Romania or Slovakia, up to almost 16% of manufacturing employment is into the automotive industries. And some estimates show that electrification will trigger indeed new jobs in the battery related value chains mainly, but also a series of job losses, especially in the ICE related suppliers that could lose up to 42% of their jobs. And existing reports, beyond the job losses, existing reports also show that more than 2 million workers in the automotive supply chains will need to be retrained, reskilled, upskilled in the coming decade to deal with electrification and the related technologies. So it gives you an idea, that example from the automotive industry, of the scale of the challenge ahead of us when it comes to employment. So it's not only about job losses, it's also about ensuring that the workers will get the skills and the retraining programs they need to cope with the new growing industries. And we also have to look at the labor impact in manufacturing sectors that are currently blind spots. What does the climate neutrality objective mean and require in terms of employment in sectors like shipbuilding, aerospace, chemical industry? Actually, we don't know. But obviously, the scale of the challenge ahead of us goes much beyond what the 17.5 billion of the Just Transition Fund and the related Just Transition mechanism can deliver. Those instruments have been designed to support mainly the regions depending on coal and energy-intensive industries. They are not enough to cope with the labor-related challenges that the Fit for 55% package will entail. And to cope with these challenges and ensure effectively a just transition leaving no one behind, we need at least additional funds, a clear mapping of employment consequences with the right level of granularity in terms of sectors and in terms of regions. We also need to strengthen the legal framework to anticipate change and ensuring workers' participation at company level to allow them to have their say in the discussions where their fate is at stake. And we need much more policy planning and policy coordination at national and regional level. And of course, we need to strongly articulate that agenda with an industrial policy at scale with the challenge. We don't believe that the ETS is as wonderful as it has been described by Diederik Samsom. We need additional instruments, additional tool. It's absolutely obvious. But without these key social requirements, we don't think that the 2030 package is fit for workers and for industrial workers in particular. And we might unfortunately end up more and more in a situation where workers will fight to keep the job they have because there is no alternative, there is no credible just transition framework at stake, and because workers also have too often to struggle with political volatility at national level. And this is what we saw yesterday in Bulgaria, by the way, where thousands of workers demonstrated to support the Maritsa East complex, because this is just what they have. There are more than 25,000 direct jobs in that region. It's a region which is struggling with a series of social and economic challenges, and currently the EU policy framework is not delivering enough certainty for those workers to believe in the possibility to have a decent life and a decent future in a low carbon economy. Thank you.
Well, many thanks to you, Benjamin, for this assessment. Maybe Diederik Samsom, who is still with us, would like, after this first round, to give us a short reaction before we take other questions. But for the time being, I'm now looking at our two panelists left, Wendel and Marcin. Wendel, question for you. Taking into account the latest science and the need to align the EU's climate and energy targets and policies with the 1.5 objectives of the Paris Agreement, what should be the next steps for the EU and the member states in finalization and, most important, implementation of the Fit for 55 package?
Thank you, Audrey. I will try to be very short. So obviously, the Fit for 55 package and the jump from the EU 2030 target from 40 to 55% is an important step, and it's going to be hard work to implement that. That is very clear. Luckily, I would say, and this is to a certain extent due to COVID, we actually have already made quite some progress, and the latest numbers show that we'll likely end up beyond minus 30% emission reductions in 2020, which is a strong overshoot of the minus 20% target that we had in the EU. But unfortunately, all of that is not enough. And I think that it's been very clear. The latest UN Framework Convention on Climate Change report assessing what all the countries in the world are planning to do for the short term in terms of emission reductions shows that we're on a pathway towards 2.5 to 2.7 degrees of warming, under the condition that all of these plans are being implemented. So even that is not necessarily clear, because not everybody in the world has the legislation in place to implement the pledges that they've made. So it's very clear that we're not there yet, and it's very clear that this is a responsibility that falls on the whole world, and that many different countries will need to take their lessons from. But it actually is also a message for the EU that even with 55%, we're not on track to have our fair contribution to the Paris Agreement's objectives of limiting temperature rise to 1.5 degrees. So we need to look at what we can do more. And I think that's a bit a challenge. Now it's very clear that we need to act. And I think Fatih Birol from the International Energy Agency yesterday was very clear that we're standing in front of a decade of disruption. And it's actually a choice that we can take of what kind of disruption that we want this to be. Is it a disruption with runaway climate change, where actually often the poorest are being hit hardest and where we're unprepared for those impacts? Or are we going for a disruption in the sense of a kind of a remake of our energy and of our economic system in a way that actually helps us to phase out fossil fuels and brings in the alternatives in a way that is socially acceptable and that supports rather than widens the gap that there is still between the poor and the rich, also in our societies, but of course also at the international level. And so that's kind of where we start from. And from that part, we look at each and every single element of the Fit for 55 package and look at what can be done to actually increase both the environmental integrity of the proposals, but also the level of ambition, so that the end result of the whole package can be well beyond 55%, also giving some meaning to the at least that is standing in front of the 55. It's clear that, yes, at the moment, the package is made to go potentially a little bit beyond, but we want to look at both in the ETS, in the ESR, in renewables, in energy efficiency, and so on, in the energy taxation directive, in all of the different elements. Where can we go further than that? And that's will be a task both for the European Parliament and for the member states to do so. And yeah, we will further identify the different proposals in the specific pieces of legislation of how to do that. But as a general message, we want to look at what can we do to even improve what are already what is already an impressive package of legislation. Thanks.
Thank you, Wendel. Perfect transition to our last speaker for this round. To close this first round, I would like to give the floor to you, Marcin, from WWF Poland, on the role of the member states in accelerating the climate actions, as Wendel mentioned also. During the negotiation on the package, it's already begun. It's going to be crunchier in a few weeks or months from now. And during its implementations, member states can still improve some shortcomings and increase its overall ambition, as Wendel mentioned. And on this point, I would like to ask you, what are your expectations from member states, from the national ownerships for this package? And if we go one step further, what are the opportunities and challenges you see, especially for Poland and Central Eastern European countries in the Fit for 55?
Thank you, Audrey. Being the last to speak, I have advantage or disadvantage that a lot of points I wanted to raise were already raised. However, looking at what will be done within the negotiations, I expect not only that some member states will try to improve and increase the targets, but also that there will be countries like Poland that will try to muddle down and lower the overall ambition of the package. So that's one of the things I'm very afraid of. Of course, in the end, there will be a need for consensus and there will be a need for getting the deal done. What are the challenges and opportunities? I think that a lot of challenges were already mentioned by the previous speakers, so I can see the three main areas of challenges ahead of us, especially for the countries in the Central and Eastern Europe, but not just them. Those are economical, social, and political challenges. Economical, because they require a lot of transition to the all economic sectors, not just energy sector, not just industry, but to agriculture and so on and so forth. For example, in Poland, I can see also some opportunities, because it's not well-known fact that most of the Poland's coal-powered power plants are over 40 years old, so they will have to be replaced soon. In such a case, there is an opportunity to avoid a locking down of the fossil fuels, but move directly to renewables. On the social part, Benjamin said a lot about this, but I think this will be one of the most important. Yes, we need just transition, not just in the coal sector, but in the whole sectors, because there will be a need for just transition everywhere where the jobs will be affected. But also we need more social security from the Social Climate Fund, as I think that its design is a bit lacking, because it's coupled with the ETS2, and in my opinion, it's not the right way. The Social Climate Fund should be the instrument that will prepare the transition to the ETS2 eventually, but that will help also with the energy efficiency that was already mentioned, with preparing the poorest households before the transition happens, with preparation of the transport sector overall. Therefore, if someone says it should be should be funded from 25% of the ETS2, no, that won't be enough. And also, please remember that 25% is the let's say European share, but then there is co-financing, which might be larger for the poorer member states. Because if Poland, for example, gets 25% of its own ETS2 plus something from, for example, Germany or France, then the whole amount of money might be more equal or even more to what would be total of the Polish ETS2 revenues, and therefore there might be no possibility to fully utilize the money from the SCF as it's now designed. But SCF will require also a large pre-financing, not just from the pre-sold ETS2 revenues, but also from other sources to prepare well in advance the transition of the households. And as for the political challenges, well, there is a lot of politicians in Europe right now that are trying to blame EU and the EU climate policy for what's going on in energy sector, in the pricing sectors, and this is also used to essentially undermine the EU politics as a whole. So this is also a challenge that we'll be facing during the next few years. Movements like the yellow vests in France will be more prevalent in many European countries. So we'll also have to deal with that. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much, Marcin, and thank you for this first round. I would now open the floor to some question of the audience. I see Diederik Samsom is not with us anymore. He had to go, unfortunately. But please put your questions into the chat box. We will answer as many as possible. We raised a lot of points during this first round: binding targets, clear guidelines, the means or the money, staying the nerve of the war, the need of deploying workers' skill, ETS not a silver bullet, securing and increasing the package ambition. Sorry, so it's been really a good round. And maybe a first question for the panel would be about the EU funds and the revenue from other sources could be used for accelerating the transition. So really shifting completely the revenue, because I have the feeling that the revenue is a key question. The revenue use, especially the revenue from ETS, from the Social Climate Fund, from the CBAM, maybe the carbon border adjustment, which wasn't mentioned today, but is also part of the package. So accelerating the transition with this revenue because of the investment needs for this transition. If we face really, and we are facing a decade of disruption, as Fatih Birol said. So who wants maybe first to react on this? Monica.
Yeah, very briefly. First of all, I think that we cannot rely everything on the public funds. I think that must be very clear. I think it was already said that the climate funds that were put in place or that were foreseen are not enough. So we have to create the possibility and the capacity also of the private sector to jump there. And I think that there is another point that we didn't touch today that is for me absolutely key, and that is the whole conversation about the taxonomy. Because if in taxonomy we are going to introduce the possibility of defining gas and nuclear green, then this will result in a shift, not so much, I think, as far as the nuclear is concerned, at least, on private investment, but very much on public priorities towards those very non-green activities. And this will distract and disrupt a trend that is there, but it is certainly not enough. We never have to forget that today, there are much more subsidies given to fossil than to renewables, and much more investments in fossil than to renewables and energy efficiency. So I really believe that this idea that a lot of people are putting in the public debate that we need, in order to be social, to subsidize fossil, needs to be answered in a very, very effective way, because this is, for me, one of the biggest risks, not only for the legislation, but also for the financial flows that should give more substance to the transition, or the transformation, to better say.
Thank you, Monica. I see Benjamin would like to react. Benjamin, allow me to couple this with a question also we have in the chat box. What volume is needed for countering employment effects, social implications, and secondly, investment for transition of industries. What instruments would you prefer, Benjamin?
Oh, I was prepared to answer your first question. So no, I just wanted to bring an additional element when it comes to financing. I mean, we have in the package a series of proposals to socialize the risks and the costs of investing, notably in breakthrough technologies. You have the Innovation Fund, you have the Modernization Fund, you have continuation of the free allocation in the ETS until 2036. We also have a discussion about state aids, and I mean, fair enough, if there is a market failure somewhere, if there is a payback time which is too long, too uncertain, it's also the role of public authorities to provide a targeted support to the private sector to invest in those areas. What we are missing, however, is a kind of symmetric instrument to socialize the profits made by those companies. We have seen recently a series of multinational companies making amazing profits, the highest profits since the financial crisis 15 years ago almost. And it's interesting to consider what they do with those profits. When you see that a multinational company in the steel sector made a profit of 5 billion euros, 2.2 billion euros will be dedicated to shareholders through dividends and programs to buy back shares. Is it the kind of fair share we are talking about? We believe that indeed, I agree with Monica, private sector companies also have a role to play in bridging the investment gap. And we would like to see maybe a little bit more of conditionalities into the different EU funds. We could talk about environmental conditionalities, but what we see missing is also social conditionalities, and conditionalities also in terms of investing in European industrial sites to transform them, to invest in them, to make them fit for the climate neutrality challenge. And this is, we believe, the best way also to secure employment and jobs in the long run. So this is also something we have to bring into the conversation. We know that there is a broader debate about corporate taxation with an important breakthrough deal at the OECD that still need to be translated at the EU level, but we believe that that aspect is also part of the conversation. I'm not sure I answered your second question.
Partly, but a good glimpse. Thank you. Thank you. I'm looking at the box and I would like to give the floor to more questions. The energy prices we talk about a lot for the moment, and the interaction also with the instrument like ETS2, so ETS for transport and buildings, and for the instrument social climate funds, this new instrument proposed by the Commission. Currently, not only energy poor Hungarians, so questions, for example, in Hungary, pay a very low electricity and heat gas price compared to the really market price. So how could the Social Climate Fund and ETS2 system compensate it effectively when the fixed prices phase out? Would you like someone to react on this technical aspect? Yes, Marcin.
Thank you. Not sure if I will answer the question fully. However, the SCF can serve as a tool not to compensate for the losses that those households will obviously have, but as a tool to help those household transition to cleaner energy, cleaner heating, and more cheaper energy. So again, energy as a tool to implement energy efficiency issues, as a tool to change the heating systems of the households to the renewable ones, etc., etc. If we will use this just to compensate for the high energy prices, this will be essentially not using the money right, and it will be spent over and over again on the same issues, not really helping the transition. Thanks.
Monica, you want to?
Yeah, just very, very quickly. I think that this is a key point, and it is a key point also for us as a community, in the sense that we have somehow to take responsibility, and a lot of us we do, and certainly Can Europe does, to explain as much as possible how come that this transition is expensive, because it is going to be expensive, but the non-transition is even more expensive. And I saw that we are going to face, not only in general in the package, but also maybe in COP26 in Glasgow, a very big offensive from Hungary and Poland on the issue of the time frame is just an excuse, but in general on the whole package. And I believe that this is promising to be a major stick point, that unless we are very much prepared with a huge, fight back, supporting the Commission and the package where it deserves to be supported, but also putting in highlight the insufficiency. For me, a big insufficiency is still, this incredible faith in market instruments that is there, and it's really complicated to explain, although there are, of course, positive elements, but I believe that the real issue here is implementation of energy efficiency and renewables in a way that can be a game changer. And we are not yet there. And I think that some of the conversation going on now on nuclear, on the energy bills, etc., are just distraction in order to go on doing what we already had. So I think that from the part of let's say, sustainable industry, but also NGOs, we really have to think about how to step up this kind of discourse. And I believe that, of course, Can Europe can certainly guide in this sense, but I really believe that we need to be much more effective in that sense, because for the moment, what is all the time in the news is, of course, the Friday for Future movement and Greta and all the rest of it. But I think that we need to become maybe a little bit more strong.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Monica. Wendel, direct reaction on this.
Yeah, well, not so much a full reaction to that, but kind of triggered by what Monica said. I mean, obviously, there's not only the fact that the cost of inaction will be much greater than the cost of action, but actually also a lot of the actions that would be undertaken to reduce emissions would in the long term be economically beneficial. But it is just sometimes a very long term, and the problem is that one needs kind of the capacity to invest in the short term for benefits that come in the long term. And obviously that is easy for those who have the means to do so, and the middle class, upper middle class, and so on. But it is a challenge for those who don't have. And then specifically when we speak about buildings, it is of course easy for those who are house owners. It is way more challenging for those who are renting. And I think all of that needs to be tackled in the right way. And that needs to be done really at the national or even regional and local level. And I think that's where the challenge is, that we are both developing EU level policies and need to also see how they interact with national, regional and local policies. And I think that's one of the key challenges there.
Good crunch between both of the levels. I see Benjamin also being triggered, but I really would like to give also the floor to Ursula, also maybe on the needed investment for transition of industry. So Ursula, you have maybe a direct reaction, and we would also like to...
No, a couple of, I mean, maybe I can take a couple of those points briefly. I mean, I think one of the important points, which I believe most people on the panel would support, but is about the investment. We have to make sure that we're not investing it in fossil fuels. So all the modernization and innovation funds and so forth, right, can only be put towards uses that will support the transition. So I suppose that's one aspect. We look at the question of public, private, and so on finance. I mean, it's a trope, but you always hear the money is around, the money is there. So the question is the pipeline. So how do you design the right projects? How do you bring together the projects with the right investors? How do you design business cases which make sure that investors believe that there is a future in the project, right? So what does that mean? I think it means, well, classically policy coherence, so that there's a clear view as to what's going to happen with the, say, the target for renewable energy and so forth. It means that, yeah, but I think that this is been a problem for many years, is how you really connect up the investment that is available with the projects that need to be financed. And I think we continue to look at ways to make sure that that can be improved. I was just reflecting a little bit on the question about the Hungarian case, and I guess the issue is, as I think was mentioned, is that you can't just sort of compensate. But if you're a person on the ground in Hungary, the solution would be to switch away from gas. But how do you do that, right? So, that means a massive renovation of the building stock. I think we did an analysis a while ago which shows there is enormous potential for the building stock in Hungary and much of Eastern Europe to be renovated. This should be the way forward. But of course, yeah, so you can't just compensate, but that money needs to be invested directly into the buildings themselves. So how do you do that on a personal level? I think that it really shows the issue with between the big aims of the policy and then how a person in a flat in Hungary may need to have ability to move to electric, may need to insulate, may need to be able to access renewable installations and so forth. How do you do that? It's a really big challenge. And so I thought that what Benjamin was also saying about the need to really plan policies and investment across Europe at quite a local level will be essential.
Thank you. Benjamin, you would like to react on that?
Yeah, first I eventually have an answer to your second question, Audrey, about the cost of retraining. You should have told me that the question came from Andreas, a good friend. So no, but I was a bit surprised by that late question. But according to the numbers we have, and these are proxies, it's not an official number confirmed by a 2 years study from Cambridge Economics or whatever. But we know that in projects we have in the automotive sector, it costs roughly on average 10,000 euros minimum per workers. Now that amount can change according to the depth of the reskilling you need to do, depending also of the region and the kind of skill profiles we are talking about. But it gives you a proxy. So 10,000 per worker, and just in the automotive industry, as I told you, a recent study of the BCG commissioned by the electromobility platform shows that up to 2.4 million workers will have to be retrained in the next decade. So calculation is quickly done. It means a bill just for the automotive industry and supply chains of 240 billion euros. It doesn't mean, of course, that all the money should come from the EU budget. It would be impossible, of course. It's a multi-level game. Companies have a role to play, obviously. National and regional authorities as well, and in many member states they are already playing a quite active role in those programs, and we have the Skills Alliance for those of you who know a little bit that dimension of the EU action. But obviously we believe that the EU has also a role to play, especially for regions, for member states, without that kind of well-established retraining programs co-managed by social partners. And it's just for the automotive industry. As I said in my intervention, it's broader than that. I just wanted to quickly react to other points and the need also to tackle speculation and hedging and their effects on the ETS. We now have people impacted by high electricity price. and we know that some price developments in the ETS can be at least partially explained by speculative and hedging behavior from companies, private companies, that try to anticipate their needs in terms of allowances by buying nowadays what they consider as cheap allowances. So we have an issue here, and this is really an adverse impact of a market system which is not delivering what it should. It's not normal that basic citizens and especially low and middle income workers are exposed to those higher electricity prices if these prices are triggered by speculation and hedging, and if some multinational companies can make huge profits from that situation as well. So there is a need to also bring that aspect in the reform of the ETS.
Well, thank you. I look at the time and I'm into the discussion, and I feel I don't want to close the round, but I will have to in a few minutes from now, because we all want to eat and drain energy for the next round this afternoon. Maybe a last question for the round on this architecture of the package. We have the questions from Dana Marekova from Slovak Climate Coalition in the chat box, asking, okay, which part of the package of this mix of instrument, yes, because we have an instrumental mix, would you more put in the highlight? Should really stay, should be strengthened, and which would you see as a really quite a strategic issue? I think we also a lot have spoken today on the necessity of the national ownership for this package, yes, without the instrument. Maybe these questions for Marcin and or for Wendel before I close the round.
Shall I go first? So, I mean, in terms of the package as a whole, I think for us it's crucial that we ensure that emission reductions are being made in all of the different sectors, and I think that is crucial. We believe that obviously the ETS, and I'm then speaking about the ETS, the first pillar, as we know it, dealing with emissions from the power sector and the industry sector, needs to further strengthen. And in terms of environmental integrity, we believe that getting rid of free allowance is one of the crucial elements there. But similarly, we believe that emission reductions in the buildings, transport, agriculture sector are crucially needed, and there the effort sharing regulation will be key, much more key than the ETS2, because that only would come in later and so on and so on. So whether it comes or not is not the key issue for the emission reductions in those sectors, but definitely action needs to be strengthened. And I think that there's a lot of more technical elements in that debate that need to be looked at, increasing or strengthening the pathway, the scenario of emission reductions under the ESR, reducing the loopholes that exist there, and so on. So there's a whole range of issues that need to be tackled to ensure we make real progress in all sectors of the EU's economy.
Well, thank you. Marcin, do you want to add something on what? Yeah, please.
Yeah, a very short one on ETS, actually, that also we need those revenues that are generated by the ETS to be 100% earmarked for the climate action. This will generate a huge amount of money to allow for the transition. Right now, it's just 50%, and even that is not always of the best quality. Thanks.
Monica, I see you have also something.
Very briefly, I agree with everything that has been said, but I really believe that the issue of targets is key, and the fact that they are too low is not indifferent. And on top of it, as far as energy efficiency is concerned, we need them binding and an implementing mechanism that makes sure that member states stick to their big commitments, because this is not the case now. There are many other things, but I would limit myself to this one.
Thank you. A last word also from you, Benjamin.
No, just to stress that in December, the Commission should publish an initiative to cope with the social dimension of the low carbon transition. I will use Monica's words. We need also legally binding instruments. Just having a soft version of a soft law instrument is not enough. So we have high expectations for this December package, which must rebalance the Fit for 55% package and ensure that it has a strong labor-related employment social dimension.
Okay, thank you all. Thank you to all of you speakers for this great and so important discussion of this package, this Fit for 55 package, which is going to accompany us, or we accompany it for the next months, because we are really entering the implementation part. And I have, unfortunately, to close the round, one practical announcement. Allow me, still the event will continue in the afternoon, and you can use the same link to join the session at 1 p.m. after this training, after a lunch break. And in the afternoon session, climate analytics lead science advisor Michael Schäfer will launch the most recent research on 1.5 degree compatible emission reduction pathways for the EU and for 9 member states. So this will be followed also by a panel debate with the European decision makers and civil society representatives. And we will discuss how national plans such as the NECPs, the National Energy and Climate Plans, and the national long-term strategies can deliver policies that truly enable emission reductions pathways in the line with the 1.5 objectives. Many thanks to all of you. Many thanks to the participants, and see you this afternoon.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Oh.
Thank you. Bye-bye. Bedankt, Wendel.